Well, hey, friends, welcome back to the How People Grow podcast. I'm giving you just one more bonus episode to the last season. I'm David Achata, I'm your host, and our last season was about living a rooted life. And I've been wanting to get a handful of people to interview if you weren't able to because of schedules. And I am so excited I was able to get one of my favorite people to have a conversation with us today about living a rooted life. And his name is Cowan. And Lynn has been a friend of mine and a spiritual mentor, I can't believe it now, for more than 10 years. And so I'm glad we could do this. And Lynn, thanks for being here and share with us a little bit about you and who you are.
Well, it's great to be with you, David, and just to be a witness to what God's been doing with you and in you, and how you're following His lead in your life, and this opportunity to share some of that with those who listen to the good work that you do. So, yeah, Len Cowan. I live in Worcester, Massachusetts. Have lived most of my life in New England, and basically, my basic identity now, I'm 73 years old, is I'm an Abba, which means I'm a dad. I'm a dad to two daughters and a five poppy to five grandchildren, and I take that really seriously. By the grace of God, that was always been a desire of mine, is to see the people that I love uh, go as deep and as far with God in Jesus as they can. And so that's been the case with my daughters and now with my grandchildren that I spend every week with, just to be with them and as Poppy, but also as the one who wants to encourage them to go deep and far with Jesus. So that's really defined the course of my life and ministry as a priest in the Episcopal Church, with my late wife Hallie by my side, who was herself a leader in spiritual formation and prayer with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship in the New England region. About 10 years ago, we established this particular place that I live in now, which is the home I grew up in that I didn't like and left, hoping never to have to come back here. But the Lord has other things in mind, and it's been a wonderful transition back to this place, which is called the Abbey of the Way. It's a place of prayer and spiritual formation, particularly designed to help leaders to go deep with God, sort of deep fruit, deep roots, lasting fruit. So the rootedness concept is really good here. So that's what I'm about these days, is prayer
Yeah.
and spiritual formation.
Thanks, Lynn. I can't believe it's been so many years since we first got to know one another. I was traveling out there for work with a microchip company, and I overheard someone talking about your wife, Hallie. Through her, I got connected to you, and the rest is history. And as I've been there many times now, I've stayed with you, I've stayed at the Abbey, had opportunities for quiet, had opportunities to talk with you and get to know you more. I know that something you said earlier would help us know a little bit more about you and your story. So we know who is walking us through what they think it means to live a rooted life. And you said just a moment ago, you had never wanted to return to that house, but yet there you are.
Yeah.
And share a little bit more of your backstory and what do you mean by you didn't want to come back, but yet here you are now.
Yeah. Well, I grew up here in this house. It's a privileged house on the west side of Worcester, more wealthy section of the city. And I had a good life with some very, very good parents, two older brothers, but I was a ball full of anxiety. I was kind of just constantly terrified of death from a very early age, and had some sweet parents who didn't get that at all.
Mm,
Plus, I had kind of spiritual yearnings. I was raised in an Episcopal church around the corner. My dad, an atheist, my mother, a nominal Episcopalian. So I had yearnings for God, but didn't know how to approach Him, and also had these terrible nightmares and anxieties and panic attacks and so on. So this was a nightmare house for me. So I was very glad when I went away to prep school and then on to college. And I remember saying to my brothers, "You could blow up this house, and I wouldn't give a rip."
wow.
And
Man.
But gradually, God, in His kindness, brought me back to the area. I got reconnected with my parents, with their house, with this city that I live in, and a lot of things changed in me. And I find this house to be a house of peace
Mm,
and refuge, not only for myself, but for others who report that it is such because of the grace of God that's been part of my life and part of the
Mm,
life of Jesus in our midst. So
mm.
that's what it is. It's a house of grace now.
Yeah, you told me you originally had not gone to college to study ministerial type work. You had gone there for the theater.
That's right.
Share with us what were you thinking back then, and what led you into, the Episcopal and Anglican Church eventually?
Yeah, well, I was set to become a starving actor in New York City. I went to the college I went to, Trinity in Hartford, Connecticut, because I wanted to have a good time and I wanted to do theater. And I did both until I met some people who worked on the stage crew who were believing Christians and really sweet people who kind of exposed me to a different vision or version of Christianity that I'd ever experienced before in my Episcopal church that I'd quit when I was 12. So I got swept up in what's called the Jesus Revolution, which was the 1970s, a time when there was a spiritual revival on campuses of a Christian kind. So I was one of the casualties of that movement. Grateful to be swept into this marvelous life in God that had, an intimacy with God, had a kind of character development, and then had a kind of a spirituality, a disciplined spirituality that I found incredibly helpful dealing with my anxiety and all the kinds of issues that I was struggling with, continued to struggle with even after I left this place. So yeah, it was in that I got reconnected into church life and eventually got reconnected with a little Episcopal church around the corner. One summer, I was warmly received by a very gracious rector of that church and his wife, who still pray for me to this day,
Wow.
and just wonderful people. And eventually got into deciding that God's call was that I would share this life that I had in Him with other people as part of a church ministry, and eventually it got into sharing that deeper life with others who were in the same kind of leadership roles that I was, which really has become a life mission, is to
Mm.
encourage leaders to go as deep as they can with God, because he's the best. He's amazing. There's no one better than God.
I
And
love that.
so anyway.
I love that. It's not often you talk with people who are following Jesus and they say, He's the best.
Oh, no, don't get me started. I could just riff forever about, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. It's just, yeah, it drives he drives everything, and he doesn't drive. He leads, he calls, he
Mhm.
nudges. He's so kind, but he's also very insistent about what he desires. And, initially, in some cases, I'll go, what? You want that? Or is this what? Ah. And then eventually I'll say, that was right all the way along. Um,
Mm.
he's never failed me yet.
Mm.
So
It's one of
yeah.
the reasons I love traveling up there to be with you, is to be with someone who can say from experience and from age, He's never failed me.
No,
And
not once.
to get that encouragement that that's true and you can
Yeah.
trust it. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this podcast to interview you, to really have seen you through the years as someone who has lived a rooted life. And our next season coming up is we're shifting subjects to what
Hmm.
Indigenous wisdom has for us in
There you go.
today in 2026. And I know that your own practices that have rooted you involve some disciplines, also involve some traveling too.
Hmm.
And so, what I wanted to ask you about today is some of your practices and some of your travels, which will eventually lead the bulk of our conversation to Ireland.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about what your practices to be a rooted person look like, and then eventually, and how do your travels connect with that?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, as you were saying, wisdom, the wisdom that we learn in my kind of version of a life in Christ that I'll explain just in outline in a moment. Wisdom comes from two characteristics. It's a virtue that comes from curiosity that's combined with conviction.
Mm.
Those two seem to sometimes be opposed to each other. Curiosity, unfortunately, in the Christian worlds, sometimes is viewed with suspicion. That if you're curious, if you're asking too many questions, perhaps you're on the road to perdition. Whereas I think curiosity you see it in the life of Jesus. I mean, his interactions. He asks good questions. He lets people talk. Think about the woman at the well. He apparently he has some wisdom that's God's given to him, some conviction that God has given to him about this person, but he doesn't lead with that. He leads with questions. He
Hmm.
asks her to help him, and
Hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. So curiosity, however, conviction is important too. That curiosity doesn't mean your brains fall out and that you kind of adopt the latest, fad, the latest, wind of doctrine that flies along. But you carry a conviction based upon what you've received in the scripture and mediated by the tradition of well, whatever tradition we're involved in. Um, but you're curious. You're curious. So this has kind of been a part of my life, is to be curious and to try to learn from other people, whether they be followers of Jesus or not, and that there is some wisdom to be found in saying, well, how do you experience, spirituality, the divine, God, whatever. And I think that's been the genius of the life of followers of Jesus, as we've encountered
Hmm.
others who connect in different ways with what they perceive as the divine or the spiritual. We have much to learn and bring along with us, however, our conviction that Jesus is the Son of God. He is, as I say, the best. And but what another person has is perhaps best for them, and that's okay. But we engage and we learn from each other, and we'll see what Jesus does in the midst of that. So yeah, so
Yeah.
that's led my late wife and me to be, yeah, kind of people who are open, I think, and curious about the world around us, to learn as much as we can about the Word and the world and the people that are in it. And so it's led us to some interesting places.
It's good. Good overview of what a practice of curiosity and conviction looks
Yeah,
like. And that's good to hear because there's a lot of people listening, many of whom are connected to me through relationship or through past pastoral ministry work. But there are some listening who are from the business world, who
hmm,
I'm connected with, that I work with. And there are some who are listening who are from other backgrounds that are not Christian, rooted in the Christian tradition. And so, as you begin to take us on some of your journeys, you know, I'm sure you'll do great. But just to know, like, you're explaining this to this broad group of people,
yeah,
and in your own practices to remain a rooted person, rooted in your faith. Uh, for years, your practice has taken you to Ireland.
yes.
And I wanted to ask you a lot of questions because there's some real things we're going to learn there from this conversation today. So tell us a little about how did you develop this practice to go to Ireland?
Yeah. Well, earlier you'd asked about, kind of the core stuff in terms of my life with God. There are three kind of things that keep calling to me all the way through, really, my life. And now at this age, I've been able to kind of put them together. The first is God, obviously, the vision of God, kind of being able to apprehend who God is and to hear, so to speak, quote unquote, to see, quote unquote, God, which is an ongoing process and an inexhaustible process. I'm never going to get it, because God is bigger than anything you can ever think about. And so, yeah. So there's that, the kind of vision of God. Then there's becoming more like Jesus. You can put it this way, becoming a good person. And unfortunately, sometimes religious people aren't necessarily very good people. They're into their religion, but not necessarily much into the love of their religion, love for their fellow people and for the world that they live in. So that to me is important. And the third is that there's some definition to this of practice of how I keep focused on God, how I keep engaging the goodness that I wish to see God develop within me. So this kind of search at one point led us to my wife and I to visit Ireland. And we did this because we read a book that was published in 2000 called The Celtic Way of Evangelism. It was
Mm.
written by an evangelism professor who was at that time at Boston University, eventually went to a university in Kentucky. In any event, he wrote a book describing the real St. Patrick. And, we're from Massachusetts. We're close to Boston, one of the most Irish cities in the world. I mean, we've
Right.
got the Boston Celtics, a version of Celtic, in any event. So we thought we knew, Ireland and St. Patrick, but this book really reminded us of that this was a real guy. Patrick was actually a real person. Um, that he had a really fairly dramatic story. He was captured as a slave at age 16 from Wales, where he lived, brought to Ireland, from which no one ever escaped. The Irish were viewed as being barbarians, wild peoples. That when they fought in wars, their men stripped naked and painted themselves blue. This terrified the Western
Wow.
world. Just stay away from those people. And from age 16 to 22, he lived by himself taking care of sheep in Ireland, which was an arduous task. If you've ever been to Ireland, the weather is just wonderful and dreadful. So you had to be a hardy soul to survive. And he did. But it was in that time that he met God in Christ. He met Jesus in a very personal way and was eventually led to find a way to escape, return back to his home, but then heard a call later on in his life, in his 30s and 40s, to return to Ireland with the good news that had saved his life and had caused him to be able to escape slavery. And so he returned as a missionary, inexplicably sent by the Pope of Rome, arriving in 432 AD, inexplicably because, again, the Western world had said that these Irish are unsavable, they're irredeemable, just don't even go there. Any mission that has gone to them had been a spectacular failure. And so it was with Patrick. He came bearing the Latin Mass and set up a little chapel made out of wood, and it was a spectacular failure until he began to draw upon the experiences that he'd had as an Irish slave. And whether it was the capacity that a slave has to find some identification with their oppressors, he had understood a certain native Irish spirituality and decided that in order to reach these folks who had oppressed him with the good news of Jesus, he would need to adopt and adapt the expression of his faith, which was deep and broad in Christ, to match the spirituality that he had encountered amongst the Irish when he was there, which had to do with nature, it had to do with beauty, it had to do with men and women together, etc. These were all deeply rooted in Irish cultural tradition. And so when he adopted that approach, it was wildly successful. I
Mm.
mean, we can't even imagine how successful it was. Ireland at that point was feudal, it was tribal, it was small clans led by little kings, and a high king kind of ruled over the whole thing, and they were constantly at war, and it was not a happy existence for the Irish. And when they heard this good news of this Jesus, who was a good king and who loved them and loved their country and appreciated their culture, oh my gosh, they came to him in droves,
Mm.
such that by 100 years later, ostensibly all of these clans had become Christianized. It was a stunning, stunning thing. So it was on the
Yeah.
basis of that story that Hallie and I said, we want to go and follow the trail of this guy.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning, was saying, let's go to the places Patrick went to. And again, there's a lot of legend about Patrick. There's a lot of Irish blarney about him, quite frankly. But in any event, he wrote some stuff about himself. So we do know his history. We do know some things that he thought about himself and so on.
Mm.
So we started going and then kind of kept going back.
Well, the thing that's interesting about St. Patrick's life to me, um, it's kind of like Santa Claus versus Saint Nick.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
it's become something that's really big, but the person did do some things that led to the growth of these legends. Like I was joking with somebody the other day, I was like, the reason that people in Norway think that there are fairies and trolls. My wife used to live there. There's
Yeah.
belief, like, just like some people in the various parts of the United States think they've encountered Bigfoot.
Hmm.
Something has happened, and it gave growth to a story that gave way to all these things. So, humor me. What are some of the wild stories about St. Patrick?
Well, for example, that he drove all the snakes out of Ireland. that he single-handedly, made it that all the snakes disappeared. Well, frankly, there were no snakes in Ireland to begin with. But there were a lot of demonic kinds of spirits that were running around that were making people's lives miserable. It was part of the power structure of the clan system, and that stuff was cast out in the name of Jesus. So the demonic dimension of the snakes. So, something happened,
Hmm.
which was life got better, and the kind of darkness that people had experienced in their culture began to be transformed by this Jesus. And it was Patrick who brought this good news. So it's
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. But there also are wonderful stories, some of which may be true, may have actually happened. There was a story about Patrick engaging a high king. Every year, the high king would light a fire on the winter solstice, which is about the same time, in some cultures as Easter. Okay. And so Patrick decided he would light his own fire. So there's the high king over here on one mountain and Patrick over on another. Two fires are lit. The king says, we're going to kill that guy, whoever lights a fire, because the only fire that could be lit on the solstice was the high king's fire. They go and get him, they drag him over. And over the course of time, eventually, not only does the guy not kill Patrick, eventually he decides to become a follower of the Jesus that Patrick is
Hmm.
professing. Now, again, did that happen? I don't know, but
Yeah.
all of these concepts of the exuberance of Irish spirituality and life, that I experience in Boston every St. Patrick's Day when people, dress up in green and get drunk and crash around, and so on. Yeah, I mean, that's the exuberance of the native Irish culture, but the exuberance of the faith that Patrick brought was it was far from being dour. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, the Roman faith that he'd inherited when he was a boy was pretty dour, pretty kind of,
Hmm.
sad and boring. And Patrick was able to see that there's an exuberance to the life in Christ. So again, behind him.
Hmm.
So some of these miracles that he wrought, yeah, we're able to try to discern, was that legend, was that not? But suffice this to say, there was a miracle that occurred in Ireland that eventually went on not only to affect the lives of individuals, but one of the places that Hallie and I stumbled upon when we were visiting Ireland, I think the second time, was a place called Glendalough. We were hanging out near Dublin. We felt like we wanted to have a day with God, and so I think I was able to go online by that time. This would have been, early 2000s. Anyway, went online looking for a retreat center, but I spelled it Center, whereas in Ireland it's spelled Centre.
Right.
So I didn't find any retreat centers. I thought they don't have retreat centers here. So we went up into the Irish Highlands, driving a car, came out heading south, and came down into this valley that felt to us like the 1940s musical Brigadoon, which is about this Irish village that appears only once every 100 years. And we thought we
Oh,
were in Brigadoon, in this place that was kind of magical and mystical. It's
wow.
absolutely drop dead gorgeous. This valley looks like it's a giant fjord, like speaking of Norway,
Hmm.
beautiful two lakes, etc. And then this story of this community, now 100 years after Patrick, when these clans had become Christianized, a young man named Kevin decided to leave his clan in order to spend time with God. And he came to this beautiful place. He inhabited a little perch on the side of a mountain and prayed. And eventually, as often happens with people who go off to be solitaries, people find out where they are and begin to say, "Oh, great guru, tell us what you're learning
Hmm.
about God." Over the course of time, people kept coming, and eventually they persuaded him to set up shop with him in the valley and create a little Christian community. Well, that community had such light and life in it that eventually people started leaving their clans all over Ireland to join this community. Eventually, 1,000 people living in the valley, bigger than any clan had ever been. And it's what sociologists call a monastic city. It's a community based around a community of prayer at the center, with people of varying degrees of spirituality who come either because they want to find out what's going on spiritually or because they say it's better with you than it is with my people.
Mm.
And so this transformed the culture of Ireland now, not only the individuals coming to find light and life in Jesus, but communities being established around praying communities and eventually what we call churches. It changed the culture of Ireland
Mm.
in a remarkable way. So this is a really magic story. So I go to this place in Glendalough and stay at a beautiful, wonderful Roman Catholic retreat center every year to steep in the power of this faith that connected with the life of a particular people to transform not only lives of individuals, but transform lives of a culture. And my desire and prayer is that in the West, which has now become tribalized, we're a bunch of warring tribes
Yeah.
all over the Western world.
Hmm.
We've lost any kind of sense of a core narrative, which probably is a good thing because the core narrative was laced with all kinds of imperial power manifested all over the world. It's my prayer that perhaps little micro communities of people who share this life in God, this desire to be more like Jesus, and these specific practices to keep us focused will become part of a kind of cultural revival in our nation, particularly America, but also other Western nations around the world. That we'll
Yeah.
see an Irish miracle
Hmm.
happen
Hmm.
with us, with all the folks who are around us who will say, "Well, I don't believe what you guys believe, but I'm just really glad you're in my neighborhood." Because it
Hmm.
seems like since you guys have moved in, peace and a relative degree of prosperity and a sense of security has
Yeah.
developed around you. And
Hmm.
maybe it's around the God that you are gathering around.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, you mentioned about how St. Patrick came, and before all this, he tried it the way that he was taught,
yes, the
and
Roman way.
it didn't work.
No.
And I think that some of what we see that he tried that didn't work is still being tried and doesn't work. It's like, hey, let's go set up a box. Let's get people to come to the box and listen to us.
Yep.
But you said something when you were describing him about he adopted like a place-based spirituality that was more
Yes.
common to what was happening there. And I think that's interesting. I hear you talk about tribalism and how we have that now in our context in the United
And
States.
tribalism in of itself isn't necessarily, a bad thing, but it's when the tribes war against each other. And this is
Yeah.
what Patrick inherited. This
Mm.
is what he experienced himself when he was a slave. And yeah, it's that's the problem, if you will.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about what do you see as the differences between this place-rooted spirituality and a more imperial form of Christianity?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just fascinating, David, to think about the times when the what I consider the real faith of Jesus grew incredibly dramatically. I mean, miraculously. The first period was the period of the early church post New Testament, when the faith was in no way respected by anybody. It was despised by Jews. It was scorned by the Gentile culture, which would have been the Roman Greco-Roman culture of its day, and it was persecuted and hounded in almost every place it existed. And so, in that context, you would think it would be small, but it was absolutely stunning how it captured the cultures that it moved to, largely because people were kicked out by persecution. It was because of the quality of the life of the people. The early church had no plan for taking the world. They were told by Jesus, as you are going, make disciples of all nations. And I'm going to send you from Jerusalem to Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. But what they did know how to do was to allow God to make really great people.
Mm.
And that's the way of life that they adopted. And it took over the world such that eventually the Roman Empire bowed to Jesus. However, that's when things got a little bit kind of messed up because the emperor, Constantine, who was a classic Roman emperor, He bashed heads and chopped people into pieces and taxed them ridiculously. He wanted to be a Christian, but he said, I can't do it your way. So you need to give me another way to be a Christian, which was a lesser way. And whereas in those days, if you were going to be a follower of Jesus, you were an apprentice for 3 years, and the desire was that your entire way of life would be transformed by God, and then you would become a member of the community. This was a short, quick, and dirty way to become a Christian. We had temples that were dedicated to other gods that were emptied. We brought in professional Christians who led religious gatherings, and basically people were trained just go and hang with them once a week. You're good. You're a Roman citizen. You're a Christian. It sort of was imposed by cultural and imperial fiat. And then that was taken all over the world at the point of a spear. And so it gave the faith a broader expansion, but it was a strange kind of empowered version of the faith that was never the practice of Jesus. And so the story in Ireland is the story of a miraculous transformation that had nothing to do with power or with imperialism. It was thankfully removed from the reach of Rome, who basically said for about 300 years, those people are lost. Let Patrick and those people do what they want. Now, eventually, they caught up with them in the 600s and said, okay, you need to come back to being like us. You need to have the imperial faith once again. And they did. And that little thing was lost. Sorry to say. However, it was that spirituality that during that period of 300 years got imported back to Western Europe when the faith was crashing and burning because of raids and kind of works that came from the north, the invasion of and the taking out in sense of the Roman Empire, but it was the faith that got restored from Ireland. I mean, it's just it couldn't be more different, David. Couldn't be more
Yeah.
different.
What
And
was
as
you?
North Americans, I think our legacy has been that we too, like the British before us, have tended to bring our church with our culture and with our sense of empowered
Hmm.
entitlement. And that, we want to make you a Christian. I get it. We make disciples, but that's different from making believers. Jesus, that command is pretty clear. Discipleship is something that's a learning and growing process. We don't force anyone to follow Jesus. It never
Hmm.
works.
Hmm.
Never
Yeah,
works.
you nailed it. I was going to ask you something about this. You said a second ago that we want to make Christians, and that really wasn't the
No.
agenda. And I wonder if we go, and when I say it wasn't the agenda, I'm thinking back to Patrick and how he went about things. The early
Yep.
church you mentioned, and the formation of a person, the apprenticeship of a time of 3 years as an example that you gave. So what like if we go back to that period before Rome got its hands on it,
Hmm.
and we learn from what was happening there that was unique that we could really be learning from right now in terms of are rooted in land
Yes.
in context. There were special holy places and groves, and somehow Patrick says we're going to integrate these things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what can we learn from how that faith was operating and looking?
Well, yeah, I mean, if as a follower of Jesus, we tend to look at the world and say, well, this is a dark and bad world, and that our job is to kind of gather in our little safe enclave with our kind who believe what we believe in, and then every once in a while we'll have the temerity to take a little step into the big bad world and try to bring a little light, and then retreat because it's a dangerous place out there. I mean, that's a way of life that I think is imperially informed, that, empires are constantly looking at threats, and they
Hmm.
perceive threats everywhere, and they stamp them out, sometimes violently. And so I think we have something to learn about just the approach that says, actually, God is in the world everywhere, and he's doing amazing things that may not carry our particular kind of label, but there he is. Jesus Christ is at work in all kinds of people, even those who don't know his name. And so our job then is to be out amongst those folks and to be kind of exploring with them. Well, what is it that motivates you? What is it that is there something that you consider a God or the divine? What does it mean for you to be a good person? What are the ways that you are living your life in ways that help you to be grounded and rooted and deepened in your life in God? And then just see what happens. I mean, if I believe, as I do, that Jesus is the best, the fullest revelation that I can think of God is just such an completely, it's such an imponderable story. The story of Jesus is just so crazy good that I can't imagine anything any better. But nonetheless, he'll take care of himself. I mean, he's pretty good at defending himself and presenting himself. I don't need to, bash the stew out of somebody to say you have to stop doing what you're doing and come over to this. It may be that you might find Jesus in the things that you're engaging in and you're involved in. And who knows, I might find Jesus more deeply too in what I'm learning from you. So it has to do with a
Mhm.
posture of humility that kind of says, as somebody said, I'm just one beggar telling another beggar that I've found some bread,
Mm.
you know, and
Mm.
it's really tasty and
Mhm.
it's very nourishing. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a different kind of posture, and it's a real it's a kind of a appreciation of the wonder and the greatness of God in the way He works in the lives of all kinds of people,
Mhm.
and yeah, my posture is I'm going to look for you, not bring you, because you're
Mm.
already there.
Mm.
So, I'll bring what I've learned. I'll bring my experience, my little testimony, and I'll bring what I've received from the Word of God, and that can be helpful to you as you want to read and find out at least what I believe about who God is. But I'm gonna learn from you as much as you learn from me.
Mm. I love that. I'm going to look for you.
I'm gonna look for you. Yeah.
I'm not going to bring you. I'm going to look for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
good. So, Lynn, you were telling me about how the faith that took root in Ireland was really informed by what was going on in North Africa. And that might be unfamiliar to some people. So, help us understand how that connection took place.
Yeah, it's sort of a miracle story, David. Yeah, most of us would associate North Africa, frankly, these days with Islam. But however, prior to that, North Africa was really the breadbasket of Christian spirituality, with folks not only migrating north out of Israel, Christian folks, but also migrating west into North Africa, such that it was a place of deep spirituality and learning, combined with learning in the sciences and so on. It was really a powerhouse for God. However, it was nonetheless intermingled in many ways with the power of the day, which was Rome. And so there were believers who said, this is getting kind of weird. And this is kind of not the faith that we encountered when we first encountered God. So they left their communities and established sub-communities out in the desert. They're called the Desert Fathers and
Mm.
Mothers, who gathered communities around them to practice their faith. Well, in the early 400s, there was a monk named John Cassian who got permission from his superior at the monastery that he was in Israel to go and visit these communities to interview them, to find out about their spiritual life because people had gotten to know about them. So he wrote a book called The Conferences of John Cassian that described their spirituality, which had this threefold thing that I've talked about before: an intense devotion to God. We want to see Him, we want to know Him, a desire to become more like Jesus in every way, an emphasis on holiness, and then a Christ likeness, and then practices to keep us focused. So he brought this back to Israel. It was published, it became a sensation. It then became part of the basis of the training of some religious communities that were then beginning to develop across Western Europe, including Martin of Tours in France. And it just so happened that as Patrick was preparing to be trained as a bishop to go to Ireland, he trained with Martin of Tours and got
Okay.
steeped in this spirituality that Martin was ingesting from North Africa. It was consonant with Patrick's experience, his personal experience of the faith it kind of resonated with him. I'm sure he said, "This is the spirituality that I found in Ireland that he probably didn't find so much when he came back home to his old church and to the old structures of the Imperial Roman Church." But it was that he brought to Ireland. How do I know that? A little thing put me onto this. I went to a gift shop in Glendalough, and there was a statuette of Kevin, this Irish saint who had left his community and set up shop in Glendalough, and this community gathered around him. It was a picture, it was a statue of him at prayer, and he was on his knees with his arms held out horizontally. It's a very unique posture of prayer, very stylized and so on. And that much we do know about Kevin, that this was how he prayed. And it turns out this came from North Africa. The theory was this: if Jesus held out his arms for 6 hours on the cross, if you will, interceding for me, for my sin, then I'm going to intercede to him for 6 hours with my hands held out.
Whoa.
So I
Wow.
looked at that and said, "Where did Kevin get that?" And I went back, got it from Patrick, got it from Martin of Tours, got it from John Cassian, got it from North Africa. So the, if you will, indigenized faith of North Africa found its way into Western Europe briefly, gets exported to Ireland, then becomes the basis of their spirituality. And it had that same threefold thing. This kind of, they called it the unitio, being united to God in the vision of God, being illuminated, illumitatio, in the vision, in the virtue of God, becoming the light of Jesus in your generation, and purgatio, having disciplines that purge you of the old way of life of sin and death, and adopting the new way of life in Christ. So it's just fascinating that we really, I mean, shall we say, revival or deepened spirituality that I traffic in, it's North African.
Okay. All
It's North
right.
African.
We
And
have
it's
to.
Irish.
All right. We've got to do a pause here and an interlude. Okay. Because, the idea of an interlude is it's a little slice of time that breaks up the story to help us understand something else.
Okay.
So, interlude time. You mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation about St. Patrick coming to faith. He was enslaved. There may be some people who don't know the story of how he came to faith. And so, like, give us a little picture of that, about how he came to faith, and then make the tie. Because you said something a second ago that will bring us back to the present, which is when St. Patrick discovers these North African practices, he says, "This is what I knew." So take us to his conversion, and how does it tie to what he found with the North African traditions?
Okay, and this we know about St. Patrick because a lot, unlike perhaps other saints of that period, he actually wrote some things about himself. He wrote his own confessions as a defense against the Roman Church that had sent him, that was beginning to communicate, "Hey, buddy, you're not doing it the right way. You're abandoning the faith." So he wrote his confession. Basically, he met Jesus in desperation. He describes how he was, a classic kind of Welsh boy who went to church, didn't believe much, didn't pray, etc., and then captured and taken to be a slave. And it was in his desperation that he cried out to God. So his conversion was a conversion of absolute necessity. If he hadn't found Jesus, he probably would have died. And, a little side story, but you're aware perhaps of the writings of Viktor Frankl, who studied those who survived the Nazi concentration camps. And the ones who survived, literally, physically, as well as emotionally, were those who had developed a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning in a meaningless existence. That was Patrick's experience. So Jesus, the life that he had known peripherally as a boy, became central to his life as a young man in order to survive the very harsh Irish um, environment as well as his treatment. So it was that it was God who gave him the vision of how he was going to escape, which never happens. You can't escape if you're a slave. You have no money and you're marked, literally branded. but he managed to get to the right boat, and the guy actually took him back home. But it was there that he heard this call. He had a vision of the Irish saying to him, "Holy shepherd boy, come live amongst us again." That's a
Mm,
real picture of a vision of mission. Just live amongst us. That's all.
mhm,
And that's what he did. And then
mm.
shifted out of the Roman training that he had been given to develop a much more kind of come and see kind of approach, rather than come and learn Latin and then you'll be saved.
Hmm. Yeah, so thanks for giving us that little blip back in time for Patrick's life, because I think it adds some depth to him finding these practices that came out of North Africa and him
Yes.
saying, aha.
Well, it wasn't just the practices, it was the whole picture that these people had a white hot vision of who God is in Jesus. And they had an absolute commitment to becoming really great people, to becoming people who were like Jesus. It was that I'm sure he recognized. We have no writings about this, but I'm just noting that this Cassian's description of North Africa met Patrick with Martin of Tours, no question. That was an encouragement to him as he went back to say, you just be the holy shepherd boy that you used to be when you're
Mhm.
back. But now you have some more learning and some more understanding that's brought to you from Africa that you can carry.
Yeah.
And it was that spiritual. I don't even know this story, David, that in 100 years after Patrick, 100 years after Kevin and his community, there would be men and women who would be called by God to build these little boats called coracles. They were made out of wood and out of animal skin. They had an oar and a sail, but no rudder. And they would put them out in the sea, in the Irish Sea to the east of Ireland, and they would say to God, "Wherever you take me, I will bring your good news." And they would basically leave the island and go to the west. And it was these people who brought this white hot faith that is North African and Irish back to the west that had largely abandoned it because of the kind of imperial stuff that was falling apart and the kind of cultural degradation that happened at that time. So
Mm.
it's just a stunning
Yeah,
story.
it is.
And
It,
it's a picture of, I think, what the remnants of the faith in the West, amongst those who say, I want to know God. I want to be a really great person like Jesus. I want to be serious about that in terms of some disciplines, that we have the capacity perhaps to engage other people of goodwill, whether they be believers or not, and discover a new way to be a human
yeah,
being in
yeah.
a way that's going to be generative in a decaying and dying culture.
Hmm.
You know?
That's what I wanted to ask about, actually. What we have today in the West, I mean, on the surface, it looks like a skeleton of of a living, breathing, wild, mystical, mysterious,
Yeah.
life. And I think that there are people listening, me included, listening to you, and I'm thinking, well, I'll sign up for that. Um, there are others that
Yeah.
are like, I'm out.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
There may be folks say, okay, that's a little bit edgy. But again, we're not abandoning in any sense, at least I'm not promoting abandoning any of the core elements of the historic faith that's revealed in the scriptures and that's been practiced all the way through by great people that we know about and a million little people, quadrillion little people like you and me who nobody's ever going to find out about. So I'm not abandoning that at all, but I'm just saying it's way bigger than we
yeah,
imagine.
that's
It's way
right.
greater. It's way more, that we can ever dream of,
Mm,
and we have the opportunity to go on a little adventure with God to say, where are you going to show up today?
yeah,
You know?
right.
Yeah, in somebody that I couldn't even imagine. There you are,
Hmm.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah, so for us today, who live, many of us, in the ruins of
Yeah.
the imperial faith, why do you why do you think that the recovery of a rooted faith like this, it's grounded in presence, it's grounded
Hmm.
in character, it's
Yeah.
grounded in daily practice, it's grounded in this really wild history of people leaving the empire because they saw it was so corrupt. They went to the quiet.
Mhm.
Um, they they were connected to God in such a way that seems like otherworldly to us
Yeah.
listening now. And so, why do you think this kind of rooted faith is so necessary for us right now in our fast-paced life?
Well, I mean, I think that what's happened to us is that we've been kind of seduced by a business, commercial-oriented culture that's associated with the powers that be, economic and also governmental powers, that have taught us that we can get what we need quick and dirty, and just it's there for the taking. And so, yeah, do your little Christian stuff, go to your church, pray your prayers, etc., um, and you'll be good. There's a little story in that regard that's told about one of the monks of North Africa. His name was Abba Joseph, and a fellow monk came to him. Abba Joseph was regarded as kind of a spiritual father in the community he was in, and so this guy said to him, he came to him, Abba, he said, I say my little prayers, I read my little readings, I try to be good. Is there anything else I need to do? And it says that at this point, the old monk stood up, raised his hands to heaven, and 10 flames came off the tips of his fingers. And he leaned in and said to the monk, if you would, you can become all flame.
Whoa.
I mean, and I've got an icon of that downstairs that I
Crazy.
look at, and I say to myself, I would like to become all flame. I think that the
Mm,
kind of diluted, and perhaps deluded spirituality that we've now been left with in the ruins is looking for fire. And so
mm,
if we can be people who are fiery, but peacefully fiery, that consumes things in us that are dark and kind of not good, but that we open our arms with a warmth that says, "Come, warm yourself by the fire with me, and let's find this light together." To me, that's a big sell. That's a big sell for folks. They've seen it all. This culture, we've seen it all. We know it all. We've got it in the palm of our hands. We can look up anything we want to, and we can say, "Yeah, that's a bunch of bunk." But a real living, breathing, live follower of Jesus who is curious, who has classic conviction about the nature of reality, is not going to compromise on that, but is a person that's worthy of emulating. And there's some practices that can help someone who says, I'd like to explore that with you. Well, then come and try this rather
hmm
than just, well, you just need to kind of get into some kind of zone.
hmm
I mean, that's kind of like, ugh.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
that's what I like about this threefold. There's a God, there's a becoming a person like Jesus, and then
Yeah.
there's some practices that can show you the way.
Who was the one who you were just telling the story about 10 fingers up in flames? Who was that again?
Abba Joseph, just some guy,
Abba
Abba
Joseph.
Joseph, an old monk, and
Okay.
and his desire is, I want to be all fire.
So I love that. So Abba Joseph is with us in spirit with his story, and we're
Yeah,
remembering, and we're talking today about the Irish and how some of what was happening there and why you've been drawn back there for so long.
hmm
And so in the spirit of becoming all flame, what are some of those practices that you think we can learn from that early Irish Christian tradition that you think that modern people are hungry for and that we
sure.
could benefit from if we would could learn the practices, what would they
Yeah,
be?
yeah. Well, I put practices in three buckets that actually comes out of the Benedictine tradition, the tradition of Benedict of Nursia, who's regarded as the father of Western monasticism. They're disciplines that stabilize us in the faith. They're disciplines that convert us into having a real hope in God rather than hoping in some kind of something that's not going to satisfy. And then there are disciplines that call for obedience in love. So it could be any one of those areas. So, for example, in terms of faith, disciplines of acceptance, learning how to be connected, to be accepting to God and of God and accepting of others. I call them disciplines of communion. What does it mean for us to develop friendships? What does that look like? The discipline of being a friend is
Hmm.
something that, again, we're losing as a culture. We
Yeah.
have friends that are virtual, but what does it mean for me to actually become a friend of God and to become a friend of others? And that involves connection, that involves communication, that involves engagement, personal engagement, and so on. Um, let's say in terms of disciplines that engage us in hope, what does it mean for us to be able to be reflective? So these would be disciplines that have to do with journaling, with reading the scripture, with engaging in prayer in a way in which I can kind of actually step back from this crazy pace of life and begin to go to wait, well, wait a minute, wait a minute. What's happening to me? What am I learning? What do I need to continue in, and what do I need to perhaps get off of? Again, we live in a culture that provides no opportunities for that. Or if it is, it's just, again, quick and dirty. But to have opportunities to engage in disciplines of reflection. Um, oh, yeah, big one would be disciplines of rest. What does it mean for me to stop and to cease? For Hallie and me and for my family, I think the most significant discipline we ever adopted was a discipline of Sabbath, of trying to create one day out of seven in which we stopped the rat race and engaged in relational activities, connection with God, connection with one another, and so on, and just ceased this toilsome work that most of us are engaged in. These are the things that I think this culture they're longing for things like peace. They're longing for things like hope. They're longing for things like a sense of security, but they don't know how to get them. But this is where the faith that we have gives us some tools that we can show to others. And those tools don't in and of themselves save a life, but they lead us to the one who does. That's the thing.
Hmm.
Is spiritual disciplines put us in place where we might be more apt to be receptive to the God who saves and who transforms. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
For those who are listening to all this who don't have these kinds of practices, it can seem overwhelming. Like that's a lot because we're so far removed from the 3 year apprenticeship that you mentioned that
Hmm.
used to be something that was a thing. And we have so many who are saying, I want to live a more rooted life, a more grounded faith. Like, just give me one way to start.
Yeah.
What would you advise to be the one way?
Well, again, I think you just said it, is there may be one thing that you as an individual are saying, I wish that I could. So it might be, I wish that I could learn how to rest. Maybe that's it. And so the thought of devoting some time, even if it's an hour or two, to just being still, maybe just to sit outside and look at a blue sky, or maybe to read a book, or to take a walk, or to have a nice conversation with a friend, that could be a place of transformation for you. Okay. Or it could be that you are beginning to say, I'm realizing, or at least my people around me are telling me, I got a lot of anger. I'm manifesting a lot of anger. And you begin to say to yourself, I'm gonna get some help around that. And maybe that'll involve a therapist.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll involve somebody that, a good friend that you say, tell me more about my anger. I have a younger friend who told me the other day, there are two things you get angry about, Len. One is you don't like to be late, and anybody who makes you late, you get angry at. And two, you get angry when worship doesn't go the way you want it to. And
Oh,
and I said, "Whoa, Daniel, thank you. That's really good information." Because when you live alone, as I do now, as a widower, and I'm an old guy, you don't usually get that kind of good information. But
that's
that
right.
could be a place of transformation for you. One thing would be, I'm going to get some help with my anger.
Hmm.
Or it might be that you say, as I did, some now almost 60 years ago, I was downstairs on the patio at this house and I began to say, I wonder if there is a God. Is that God that I was raised with, is that real? And I began to do this kind of, I want to I want to search for God. And is God good? Well, maybe so, and etc. That became a path of transformation for me. I said, I want to know first if there's a God, and secondly, if there's a God, what's this God like? And that search eventually led me to Jesus
Hmm.
about a year later. So any one of those things, it's just kind of picking up on a little thread in your life that is either an issue for you or it's more than likely an invitation from God.
Hmm.
God says, okay, you need to stop every once in a while and just
Hmm.
smell the roses. You pull on that little thing and stuff starts to happen. Or you say,
Yeah.
man, I'm hearing I'm angry. You begin to open that little thing up and whoa, that begins to move. Or you begin to say, gosh, is there really a God? And where would I find out about that? And who are the people that you might lead me to? Boy, that'll open up some stuff.
Hmm.
Any one of those three.
That's
It's just
great.
you start with where you got what you got
Yeah.
and then let it go from there. You don't have
Yeah.
to adopt some giant program. That's what
Hmm.
I love about at least the Christian faith is that it says come as you are and just come following what you need to follow.
Yeah. Start where you are. Start with
Yeah.
your one issue,
Your one
potential
issue, your one
invitation.
discipline, your one thing,
It's great.
spiritual question that you have, any one of those.
Glenn, this has been great to hear some of your story and what you have been learning in your travels and where you're at in your life right now. Sometimes I know that when we um, get a chance to talk about these things that we've experienced, we have our own new insights as we're
Mhm.
talking it out. Um, as we've been together today, what has come up for you as an insight that you think you want to pay attention to going forward from this moment?
Well, as I think I told you before the start of this thing, recently, God at my age seems to be saying to me, it came actually through my grandson, 11 years old, who said to me, Poppy, he said, you're old, you're retired. Why are you working so hard? And I began to protest, and I thought I heard God saying, I'm speaking to you through the boy. You need to
Mm,
listen to me. So anyway,
mm,
so I've engaged in some changing of the shape of my ministry, including ceasing engaging in what's called spiritual direction, which is a form of offering counseling to individuals. And it has been very discombobulating
mhm,
to take that out of my life. It's been a real core of what I do. But God's invitation at this stage is who I am. He wants me to be. And so, it's been a little distressing. I just feel kind of out of sorts, not
mhm.
having this going on in my life. And what our conversation today has kind of said is, that'll be worked out fine. You know,
Yes.
that God's at work in the desolation that I feel
Hmm.
about losing that. And I stepped away because I thought God was inviting me into rest and into more unstructured relationships. Being the person at this stage of my life, I'm given the grace to be able to be available for relationship.
Mm.
And He'll take care of making that work.
Yeah.
So that's been kind of been kicking around as we've been talking. So.
Yeah. I love that, Len. Thank you for sharing that. If people want to find out about you and your work with the Abbey of the Way, how do they do that?
Basically, just go to the website, abbeyoftheway.us or .org, Abbey of the Way, and there we are. And just
Awesome.
reach out if you'd like. I'd be happy to talk to whoever and whatever. Been great to talk to you. Thank you.
Well, thanks, friends, for being here for this bonus episode for the How People Grow podcast. We're going to go ahead and sign off, and I want to direct your attention to what is coming. It's been a couple weeks since I've started, but I've been recording a new season. And so in the next few weeks, we're going to launch season 7, which will be on what Indigenous wisdom has for us today. And I'm interviewing scholars, authors, teachers on this subject, many of whom are Native American in some way, shape, or form, nor Central or South American. A few are not, but are deeply invested and embedded in this conversation. And that's going to be coming soon. So if this podcast has been helpful to you, I want to invite you to go over and support us by giving us a review. on wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever. Or you could drop us a couple bucks over at Substack.com. So check out my link over at Substack, and for a couple bucks a month, you can get in on a monthly conversation where we discuss some of these things. Thanks for being here. We'll see you back here in just a few weeks for Season 7, What Indigenous Wisdom Has for Us Today. See you soon.